When we imagine medieval society, we usually think of three groups of people. The kings and the nobles at the top, the peasants and the serfs at the bottom, and maybe knights and clergymen somewhere in the middle. But there's a whole group missing from that picture. The people who actually ran most medieval cities, who controlled a lot of the trade and built many of the fancy town halls and guild houses that you can still see today in cities like London or Prague or Vienna. They're called burghers, and if you lived in a medieval town, you'd probably want to be one. In this video, I'm going to explain what a burgher actually was, how you became one, how they spent their time, and why this slightly obscure title really matters if we want to understand medieval European history. What is a burgher? Well, firstly, being given the title of burgher wasn't a profession. It's a legal status. In many medieval European towns, a burgher was a recognised citizen of the town, someone officially part of that urban community, with particular rights and duties inside the walls. The exact details vary, and they depend very much on where you live. An imperial city in Germany, a Flemish cloth town, an Italian commune, and so on. But the basic idea is pretty similar. If you were a burgher, you usually had the right to live and trade in the town, the right to own property there, the protection of the town's own laws and courts, and at least in theory, some kind of representation in the town's political life. Socially, burghers sit in the middle of medieval society. They're not peasants or serfs tied to the land, but they're usually not nobles or high-born people either. You could think of them as urban somebodies, merchants, master craftsmen, prosperous shopkeepers, and a few professionals whose names keep showing up again and again in the tax lists and council records of the town or city. But there is an important distinction. Just living inside the town didn't automatically make you a burgher. Plenty of poorer people, like labourers or servants or journeymen, they might rent a small room within the walls of a town or city, work there, perhaps even spend most of their lives there, and still not be granted the status of burgher. So being a burgher is less about I live in the city and more about I belong to the legally recognised core of the city. Okay, great. But how did you actually become a burgher? How do you actually join the club? Again, it varies from place to place, but there are some common themes. To become a burgher, you generally needed some of the following. You had to be a resident in the town. You couldn't just stroll in from the countryside and call yourself a citizen. Some degree of property or wealth, maybe you owned a house or shop, or you had the means to support yourself somehow. Often, guild membership or a recognised trade, being a master in a craft or an established merchant, helped out quite a lot. And in many places, you had to pay a fee to be entered into the town's register, effectively a kind of citizenship payment. The process often involved appearing before town authorities and swearing an oath of loyalty to the town and its laws, having your name written in to the burgher roll. From that point on, you were legally part of the urban community. But that status also came with obligations. Burghers were expected to pay urban taxes and tolls, to serve in the town militia if the bells rang and the walls needed defending, and also to contribute to the maintenance of the town's infrastructure, so things like the walls, the streets, and sometimes defences. So if you were a young journeyman arriving in a new town, you might work for many years, become a master of your craft, join a guild, and only then finally qualify as a burgher. If you were born into a burgher family, however, things were easier. You could inherit that status or qualify more straightforwardly. But it's worth noting, towns still cared about your reputation, your wealth, and whether you were seen as a respectable member of the community. So, being a burgher meant that you were inside the circle of the town's laws and privileges. You paid into it, but you also benefited from belonging to that legally defined urban group. what did burghers actually do? Most burghers were not lounging around living off investments, and even those that did own land typically didn't have enough of it to live off. They were working people, but usually at the more comfortable end of that spectrum. Some common burgher professions might be things like merchants, moving goods across regions and borders, cloth, grain, wine, metalwork, luxury items. They could be master craftsmen, weavers, fullers, goldsmiths, bakers, butchers, and many others, running workshops and employing journeymen and apprentices. They could be moneylenders, notaries, and officials dealing with contracts, accounts, and the general paperwork of urban life. Economically, burghers sit at the heart of the town's wealth. If your town is booming, it's usually because a burgher class is doing well, running successful trades, organising markets, and exporting goods. Politically and socially, many burghers organise themselves into guilds, which are associations of people in the same craft or trade. Guilds weren't just economic clubs though, they had their own internal rules and courts. Sometimes they had religious roles, patron saints, chapels, altars in churches, processions. And they often had a voice in how the town was governed. In lots of cities, the town council and its magistrates were drawn from the burgher elite, especially the wealthiest merchants and masters. These are the people deciding things like how taxes are levied, how strong the town walls should be, which markets are permitted, and how they're regulated, and even, sometimes, whether the town sides with a king or a prince or another city in a wider political conflict. So, while peasants out in the countryside might have little or no say beyond their village, burghers could, at least in principle, help to shape the laws and policies of their urban community. But that doesn't mean every burgher had equal power, far from it. A small shopkeeper and a major international cloth merchant both technically count as burghers, but their influence at the town hall would be very, very different. And that inequality inside the burgher class sets up a lot of the tensions that we see in late medieval and early modern towns. Burghers live in a kind of in-between space. They're not peasants or serfs working a lord's land, tied to a manor by feudal dues. Their wealth comes from trade or from craft, sometimes from urban property ownership, or, in general, inherited wealth. Many towns had charters that granted them specific freedoms. Things like the right to hold markets, to administer their own justice, or to pay taxes directly to the king instead of through a local lord. But on the other hand, burghers are not hereditary nobles. They usually don't have vast landed estates, and they certainly don't have aristocratic titles. This middle position leads to a friction in two directions. That friction could go upwards, with nobles and princes who want to control towns and raise taxes or interfere in urban affairs, or indeed downwards, with the poorer town dwellers, the labourers, the journeymen, the urban poor, who feel that they're excluded from the privileges that burghers and their guilds give them. Throughout late medieval Europe, we see urban revolts and conflicts where the poorer citizens were demanding more say in government. The guilds challenge older patrician families who've been dominating the town councils, and towns collectively trying to resist a bishop or a prince or a noble trying to impose their will on them. In these moments, burghers might turn out in arms under city banners, defending not just their homes, but their corporate rights as a community. So burghers aren't just a kind of comfy middle class, they're right in the front line of social and political struggles, sideways with their neighbours and upwards with their rulers. So why should we care about this weird medieval legal category? Because, over time, the medieval burghers evolve into something much more familiar: the early modern bourgeoisie. These are the urban middle and upper middle classes who play key roles in things like the Reformation, so supporting or resisting different religious changes and adaptations depending on their personal interests and beliefs, things like the growth of commercial capitalism, investing in trade, workshops and early financial systems, and later political movements that challenged the old aristocratic privilege and the old Ancien Regime order to push for new forms of representation. When you hear about the bourgeoisie in 18th or 19th century history, the people behind revolutions, reforms, and industrial era politics, they are, socially and conceptually, descendants of these medieval burgher elites. Even the shape of many historic European city centres today, the market square, the town hall, the tall, narrow houses often surrounding them, they all reflect the priorities and power of burghers. Those buildings weren't just thrown up by nameless crowds, they were financed, controlled, and used by this particular class of urban citizens. So understanding burghers isn't just about learning a new word, it's a way to understand how medieval towns actually worked, who held power, who didn't, and how that set the stage for the modern world. Let's quickly recap them. So a medieval burgher was a legally recognised town citizen, usually with some property and a trade. Someone who owed taxes and often militia service to the town they lived in. And a member, crucially, of the urban community that dominated trade, crafts, and local government. They stood between peasants and nobles, often clashing with both, and over centuries they evolved into what we call the bourgeoisie, a class that becomes central to Europe's economic and political transformations. Burghers weren't just people who happened to live in cities, they were a distinct legal and social group that built medieval urban life as we know it. Their legacy is still visible in our city centres and politics today. Thanks so much for watching, and welcome to Your History. This is the first video on this channel, so for those of you who are here early, welcome. I'm really keen to build a bit of a community around this channel, so if you've got any ideas for future videos, please feel free to add them in the comments. If you've got any corrections to any of the things that have been stated or said in this video, please let me know, and welcome to Your History. Thanks.